So I opened the book after I read the whole thing. I was opening to prep for the interview. And right here it says, it's time to rewrite the rules of success. And then I read that that quote meant something to you different than what I thought. So can you tell everybody what that quote means to you?
Oh, what was it? Tell me what you mean.
Well, when I read it, I thought like, okay, like it's time for women to rewrite. I thought it was like a quippy tagline. And then I read further and your mom said it to you when you were 13.
Well, so what my mom said to me when I was 13 was that when I grew up, everything was going to be different. And when she grew up, she was told you could be either a nurse or a teacher, and like that was it. And then you're going to get married, and you're going to have kids and take care of your family. And like that was going to be the limit of your professional opportunities. But what's interesting, just to go back to that line, is that I read dozens and dozens of business books in my 22 years as a business journalist. And there are literally rules that have been written about like the rules to be a good leader, the rules to be a good executive. And there is this whole like archive of library full of books about business success. And none of them are about women. And sometimes there are women included in them, but none of them are really about women. And so for me, what I wanted this book to do was redefine what success looks like and to include an incredible diversity of women with different backgrounds in that image. So when my mom told me, oh, by the time you grow up, everything is going to be different, what she was saying is like, of course, women will be running companies. Of course, women will be incredibly powerful in politics and government. Like the time has come. And she was wrong. But now I think the time is now, if that makes sense.
The time has finally come. But also what I was thinking, because you talk about having a great mentor and he was a man. And you said he kind of treated you like you were his daughter.
I think he treated me the way he would want someone to have treated his daughter. And the fact that he had daughters made him think like, how do I want my daughters to be treated? And how can I give that kind of mentorship to this young woman who is like so eager and trying so hard and probably so scared of so many things? Like, how can I give her that kind of, like kind mentorship and guidance?
Well, a lot of my mentors have been men also. And I think in part it's because there aren't a ton of women that were doing it. There were some, but I think in journalism, like there was like one woman. And so the generation above me was like very competitive. There wasn't like that urge to help the way there is now. So I think when you wrote this, it kind of like provided that blueprint for people who don't have mentors yet, which was really cool.
But also I hope that it helps explain that mentorship comes in all sorts of different shapes and sizes. Like it's not going to be, there isn't just a one size fit all version of what mentorship looks like. And my boss at the time was my mentor, and that was a very specific relationship. But I think what I've seen in writing this book and also in talking to hundreds of women around the country is that just like we need to rewrite the rules of success, we also need to rewrite what mentorship looks like and what we expect from mentorship. And what I found so interesting is so many women have told me that some of the best professional advice they've gotten are from women who are at their same level, maybe at other companies, maybe in totally different fields. But to be able to have trusting professional relationships where you talk about your work challenges and opportunities with people who are going to push you and hold you accountable, they don't always have to be your boss or more senior to you. Sometimes they can be someone who's at your level. And I found so many women created what they called like a board of directors of people who'd be like, they're board of mentors. And like, they'd go to one person for one type of advice and another person for another type of advice. And they didn't get everything they needed from one person, because you never do. But it's just like you have lots of different friends. They had a lot of different people who could fill different holes for them when they needed them. And I think it's also time to rethink what it means to have mentors and to have a supportive professional network, because it is so essential to success in business and in life. And I think people need to sort of redefine what that looks like as well.
So you interned for Vice President Al Gore's domestic policy office, and then right out of Princeton, you worked at Fortune magazine, and then you've been in media at CNBC as a business reporter. How have you seen the rules being different for men and women?
Well, it's interesting because when I started off and I was thinking about all those business books that literally were like the rules to succeed in business, when I started off, there was this very dominant archetype of the leader, and he was a man in a suit. And there was this whole theory of leadership that came from GE CEO Jack Welch. And it was this thing called Six Sigma, and it involved cutting the bottom 10% and delegating and splitting up a company. And it was just a very specific approach to business. Mm-hmm. It doesn't work for every type of company, and it's not right for every leader, but it was so embraced and idolized that it became like this thing in business. And it was interesting because like that is what the rule of, like, that's what it took to be a successful leader. You had to be a man, you had to lead in a certain way. If you were a woman, you understood that there was only room for one of you in the room, so you didn't have an incentive to help bring other women behind you. And I've really seen the business culture change, especially in the past 10 years. And I think there's been this real shift towards understanding that women are like, I want other women around me. I'm going to be more successful if I have more women around me. And then logistically, companies understood that they had to have more than just one woman in the room. So that woman didn't feel so threatened by having other women around her. So I think, it makes sense if you were in 1992 in finance and you knew there's only room for one woman, that you weren't going to help other women. You just couldn't possibly if you were going to hold on to your job. But now I think I know I see women all over the country. And even I was in London talking about my book, all over the world, really understanding that they will be more successful if they help other women too, and that you need more women with you, and you need more people from underrepresented groups to shift the culture and to really change the culture. And I think it's a much more supportive environment. And I actually think that was started maybe 10 years ago, but what really changed was during the pandemic. Mm-hmm. And the pandemic sort of laid bare the craziness of everyone's life. And every leader had to think about being more authentic and vulnerable because everyone was going through so much. And I actually think that the pandemic shed light on the fact that some skills and strategies that female leaders are more likely to deploy are actually things that are essential and are table stakes for everyone right now.
Interesting. Okay, so because I've heard you say that you didn't notice or think about inequality while you were growing up as much, and you didn't think about it at Princeton, and then you got to Fortune magazine and you felt it for the first time. What did you see and feel?
Well, so when I was growing up, my mom told me, by the time you grow up, you'll be able to do anything. I felt like my whole academic career, everything was very equitable. And if I worked hard, I could succeed. And then I got to Fortune magazine, which was the magazine of record for the business world. And we put the most powerful people on the cover. We had the most powerful CEOs coming into the doors of our offices, and we did the Fortune 500 list. And there was no question, once I saw the way it all worked, laid bare in front of me on the pages of the magazine, that men held almost all the most powerful positions in business, full stop. And if you looked at the people in power at the magazine, they were mostly men. There were a couple of women, but women got more and more rare the more senior you got. So people at my level, the entry level, they were split 50-50, no question, maybe even a couple more women. But at every level beyond that, women left to have kids, to do whatever. They didn't feel like they were succeeding there. So you just saw fewer women in the most senior ranks. So it just all became kind of clear to me that my mom had been totally wrong. And the fact that I believed her was very naive of me. And on one hand, I was grateful that I got to be naive and optimistic and not hampered by all of that. On the other hand, I wish I'd had a little bit more of an education of what to expect and how to navigate it.
Yeah.
This is a very different time. In the year 2000, when I started as a magazine reporter, they had until very recently had these like bar carts that would go around on Fridays and mix people drinks. It was like a very different era that in many ways was much more similar to the Mad Men era than you could possibly imagine.
So you have some stories about how in the early days of being on camera, men treated you, I would say interestingly.
Differently
is probably a better word. When the cameras weren't rolling. Is there a story that sticks out to you that you think sort of illustrates that?
I would say when the cameras weren't rolling, and also when the cameras were rolling, I felt very condescended to on camera many times. But I think I will always remember going to the Consumer Electronics Show. It's this big tech show in Las Vegas. When it was January and I was pregnant to have my second son in March. So I was like really pregnant. I was like 6 weeks away from giving birth, and I was massive. And I was sitting there up on a stand, like getting ready to interview people. I had like tons of interviews booked with CEOs, and the number of them that came in and either commented on my body in ways that was totally inappropriate or touched my belly without asking me. I was like, what is happening here? And I was like, this is crazy. Like, why is this guy rubbing my belly and talking about the size of my breasts moments before we're going to have a live interview and I'm going to interview about his business? It was just bananas. So for me, that was a real turning point, because I was like, look, this is insane, but I need to keep it together, and I need to keep my cool and be prepared to ask them the same questions I was going to ask them before these inappropriate comments. And I need to just not lose it here.
So I sort of have some moments differently that I actually feel a lot of shame around, because I'm frustrated that I didn't speak up. I didn't have the vocabulary or the confidence to do it.
Yeah.
In reflection, how do you feel about your moments?
I feel like that was actually an empowering moment for me. And I'll tell you why. It's because I realized that I had a job to do, and these guys were reacting to me in this way because it was so foreign and unusual to them. Here I was, a journalist, and I didn't look like what they expected me to look like. I was sort of not in sync with their expectation of a business journalist, right? And they felt uncomfortable with me being so massively pregnant. And they expressed that discomfort. You know, like sometimes when you're uncomfortable, you laugh. Like they were expressing that discomfort by like talking about it and making comments, maybe to make themselves feel better with it. And up until that point, I really had felt like I needed to hide the fact that I was a woman, or like to hide, diminish my femaleness. And then I was like, there's nothing I could do about this. I am super pregnant. Visibly sitting in a chair, 7.5 months pregnant, or whatever it was. And to me, it was just like, if I can let this not bother me, I will be more successful, because they are uncomfortable, right? I don't have to be uncomfortable. They can be uncomfortable, but it doesn't have to make me uncomfortable.
That's amazing that you had the language to give yourself.
I don't even know if I understood it then, but I knew I was like, I'm not going to let this screw up my interview. Yeah. Like these guys, I'm not going to let this throw me off my game, because then they're winning. If I keep my cool, then I'm doing my job. If they throw me off and I start to cry, then they win. And that's not going to happen.
That's, I think one of the things that comes with experience that's so valuable is you don't let other people shake you.
But I also think one thing, and the reason why my book is so heavy, which you joked about at the beginning, is I have 40 pages of endnotes in there. And I decided that my book wasn't going to just be about the stories of inspiring women, but also about the data, the numbers. There are so many different research studies that explain why the ways in which women lead, and the fact that I have to show up as my full pregnant self as work, is going to actually make me better at my job. And when I was going through the process of reporting this book, I realized that it's really important to have the data in there, because the data has enabled me to be liberated to not let things bother me, and also to know how to have those comebacks and know what to say in those terrible situations. And when I was reading through all this research, I found myself every day getting more and more confident, because I realized that those things that used to throw me off really had nothing to do with me. And so the more I saw the research, I was like, oh, I should be more confident. Oh, imposter syndrome, that's a real thing. It's not just me. Cool. And so there was something so liberating about all that research. So that's why there's so much data in the book. And I think it's really, I hope it's really useful. I know it's been really useful for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think you have the facts, you have numbers, you have stats. And so it's not just like the idea that it feels good or it's a good thing to do. It's that it's actually valuable and profitable.
100%. And by the way, there are a lot of stories in my book that feel good. To me, it was a gift to report this book during the pandemic, because the stories are so inspiring, and it feels so good to see parts of yourself in these women who are doing extraordinary things, and also to see that there are people who are changing the world. I mean, it just feels so good to read these stories. But I think that data, in a way, is like the thing that makes you stronger at the end of the day. You have the inspiration, but then you have the thing that can make you tougher and stronger to go navigate whatever challenges are out there for you.
Okay, so one data point that you include is there's a study that finds when a company has a female CEO, stock prices actually increase by 20%, profits increase by 6%, and stock returns increase by 8%. What do you make of those numbers?
Well, look, there are a lot of different studies like that. And I think what's interesting is if you don't like one of the studies, there are other similar ones. Female leadership tends to correlate with better outcomes. Some people would say that's because there are so few female leaders. Women have had to fight extra hard to get to where they are. So only the best ones make it. And therefore they're more successful. So that could be one reason why. But it also could be because women are leading in different ways and because they understand that they're facing extra scrutiny. Mm-hmm. Because they are so rare, and therefore they have to be very thoughtful and very considered and very data-driven in their decision-making and driven by data and not by ego or assumptions. And so I think the more you understand that you're under a microscope, the more you really are going to push yourself to be incredibly careful. I knew that I would be under a microscope for writing about the great ways that women lead. And that's why, again, I relied on the data.
Yeah, there's no room for error.
There's no room for error. And so there are lots of reasons why maybe female leadership styles are more successful. But I also think at the end of the day, you have to think about how pressure can turn coal into diamonds, you know? And so, and then also I write extensively in the book about the ways in which women tend to lead. The skills and strategies women are more likely to deploy are incredibly valuable in a business environment.
Well, one of those that you talk about is the ability to adapt and change quickly. And I agree with it. And I just couldn't figure out why. Why is that a typically female trait?
So I was really surprised to find in the research that women are more likely to make swift decisions when the situation changes. I know sometimes I'm good at making fast decisions and other times it takes me forever to make up my mind. And I was like, oh, this is so interesting that women are more likely to say, the situation is changing. Let me evaluate the data. And then I'm going to make a decision, not based on the fact that I feel attached to a plan I made 6 months ago. I'm not going to be emotionally attached to this thing I invested time and money, and I'm watching the data change. And I'm going to use the data to look around corners. And I saw it play out in so many amazing different examples in the book. So like the CEO of Clear, the biometrics company that you used to use just to get you through the airport. At the beginning of the pandemic, she was like, the pandemic thing is going to shut down all travel. It was February, a month before the world really shut down. And she cut their entire ad spend for the year. She made a swift decision. She adapted to the situation. She didn't wait to see if maybe things would get better. She said, I know we're going to be more effective, more successful if we can make the painful decision now to cut $24 million in ad spending now and not wait for it to get better. It's going to be better for our partners. It's going to be better for us for the long term. And she also said, let's invest in the long term. Women have a lot of different characteristics that correlate with longer term planning and decision making. So she said, we need to invest now to turn biometrics into a health company. So then they created the health pass, the Clear Health Pass, to get people in and out of offices. If you go to a conference, you might have to upload your vaccine information or your COVID test information.
Fascinating.
So this combination of making swift decisions immediately to address the immediate crisis and then planning long-term. And there's so many reasons why women are more likely to do that balance of the long-term and short-term planning. Mm-hmm. And it's so essential for business.
It feels really exciting to hear that because I think everything I was shown and taught from society growing up is that men have great foresight and men actually have great long-term strategy and planning. And to know from the data that women actually do is very cool.
But what's so interesting is that there's this sort of myth of the male visionary, right?
Yes.
Someone who has a vision, like Mark Zuckerberg had a vision. Elon Musk has a vision, this crazy vision of how they're going to change the world.
It's kind of like this boy wonder thing though. That's why we allow
That's
all
a
the
perfect way of
discussion.
putting it. Yeah. So boy wonder has this crazy idea going to change the world. Interestingly, men are more likely to found companies. There are more men founding companies very, very young, like either when they're in college or straight out of college. Women are more likely to wait. And there are various studies about this, not comprehensive data. But in my book, I write about many women who started their companies in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. A lot of this comes down to the fact that men start off when they enter the workforce with much higher confidence. Women start off with lower confidence. Men's confidence tends to decline and women's confidence tends to increase, and it crisscrosses around age 40.
No way.
Yeah. And so what's interesting is that women's confidence increases with experience and age and wisdom. Like you should be wiser as you get older, and men's confidence decreases. And the researchers thought maybe that was because men realize they may not achieve all of their dreams, or they maybe realize that they didn't know as much as they thought they did in the first place. So there are a couple of different reasons for that, but it's really interesting to see how oftentimes, being a visionary is not the only thing that it takes to have a successful company. And I do think that as a society, we're very focused on these few rare examples of people like Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk. But the reality is that most businesses take someone who's going to work hard, focus on the numbers, and have a lot of the long-term sort of technical planning skills that women may be more likely to focus on. And I think, frankly, there are a lot of male CEOs who are not these crazy visionaries, but who have built incredibly successful businesses by just doing, putting one step in front of the other and thinking long-term at the same time.
That's Bob Iger's whole philosophy. Like his whole book is basically about like brick by brick, like
brick by brick. And I think that, by the way, like he's not a crazy visionary. He's like a practical visionary. And I think that there's less attention. Let me put it this way. There's so much attention on the crazy visionary approach to the world that I think the more practical brick by brick approach has sometimes been overlooked. I was talking with a young woman at one of my book signings, and she said, I'm working at a startup. I have this idea. I'd like to start a company. I think it's a really good idea. I've done market research. She said, but I think I'm more of a COO type. I don't really think I'm the CEO. And I said, why not? Like, you've done the research, you have the idea. Like, why wouldn't you be the CEO? She said, I don't know. I just don't think I'm like a crazy visionary, like a crazy risk-taking visionary. I'm a more like get it done type executive. And I was like, well, there's no reason that if you have an idea, you did the market research, you have the experience, you couldn't start a company. But for her, there was this myth that she needed to be like ready to do something crazy to be the CEO, the face of the company. And so I said, read my book and let's talk. But I think that there's nothing about her and her experience that wouldn't make her a reasonable person to be the CEO of a company. She doesn't need to find a CEO. She could be the CEO herself.
I really like the idea of thinking that success doesn't look like a Mark Zuckerberg or a boy wonder type. Can you give me some examples of unique leadership styles that stood out to you while you were writing the book?
I mean, there's so many different ones, but I have to flag this amazing woman named Jennifer Holmgren. She's the CEO of a biotech company that you've probably not heard of. It's called LanzaTech.
What does biotech even mean?
Biotech means like biotechnology. So it's basically using technology to do things that are biological. So for instance, I'll give you more than you want to know about LanzaTech, but they have a technology that turns pollution into fuel. So they literally took a microbe, like a little microbe, and the microbe eats up pollution, digests it, and basically poops out fuel.
That's so cool.
And that's the way she described it to me. So she was talking about just like the way that you can like use yeast to make beer, and like it eats the sugar and it whatever. So basically it's like eating up the pollution and pooping out the fuel. And it's like, it sounds like magic to me, because obviously you want to get rid of pollution and create more fuel. And so it's a crazy, amazing technology. And Jennifer Holmgren is the CEO, is a Colombian immigrant. She moved to the US when she was 8 years old. She speaks an incredibly quiet voice, very, very introverted, and with a slight imperceptible accent, but she would definitely rather not speak. She's someone who talks about hating to do interviews. She's just not into it. She loves her company. She's passionate about her company, but she's not an extrovert. And first of all, she's so passionate about this company and using this tech company to make a lot of money for investors, but also to help the environment, that she's willing to push herself out of her comfort zone and to do pitch meetings with investors, and also to pitch her technology to factories who could use her technology to turn pollution into fuel. So I think her passion for this purpose-driven company has helped her overcome her reluctance for wanting to get up in front of a room and speak. But even more importantly, she figured out how to use her unique trait of being an introvert and to use that to become such a good listener that she's actually better at negotiating. And I said, what do you mean? Like, why are you better at negotiating if you're not like out there slamming the table, telling people how great your technology is? And she says, no, I give my presentation, which I don't enjoy, but I do it because I'd rather not be in front of a room making a speech. But afterwards, I listened to people. I'm not trying to get a word in edgewise. I'm not trying to put on a show. And I listen to them so well and so carefully that I understand what it is that they really want. Not what they said that they wanted at the beginning, but what they really want. And then I can come to them with a better negotiating stance. And so to me, what was so fascinating about her leadership style is that she understood who she really was, what she liked, what she was good at, what she could push herself to be better at. But then she took that thing, which has been used as a weakness, has been described as a weakness. Introversion has been described as a weakness in business. She took it and she deployed it as a strength. And I think success in leadership is all about understanding who you really are, pushing yourself to get better where you can, surrounding yourself with people who can complement you, but then also taking these things that we've always thought of as flaws and deploying them as superpowers.
There's all of these examples, I think, after or during the girl boss era of female leadership that we kind of saw fizzle out or burn out, I would say. Women who built companies and then for various reasons took a step back or like even sold some of them.
Well, there are two things. There are the women who were canceled by the media or criticized by the media. And then there are women who opted to sell rather than to keep fighting.
I almost feel like we could do a whole episode on the women who got canceled because like WeWork, that guy wasn't canceled and he has, what did they, I think
Adam Newman, who was investigated for fraud with WeWork, his company imploded. He was written a $300 million check by an investor for a pre-revenue business idea.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden these women who did sort of like obtuse things that they couldn't really say like exactly what they did were canceled. So that's like a whole nother episode. But I think the women who were burnt out, you hear those stories a lot. Did you hear any stories of women who found incredible joy leading?
So many stories. And in fact, I think burnout is real. I felt it. I know everyone has felt it at one point or another, but I do think that all the women in my book genuinely, and I interviewed 60 women. I feature 60 women in the book, but I interviewed 120 women. All of them felt joy in their companies and understood that like the challenges and the frustrations and the tears and the pulling out your hair was part of something that they really believed in. And one reason I think so many of them felt joy in it is because many of them had purpose-driven companies, had the sense that if they succeeded, they weren't just going to be making money, they were also going to be helping people. And there are a lot of reasons why purpose-driven companies tend to be more successful. It tends to be easier to hire and retain talent. If the young people you're hiring know they're doing something good in addition to just making money for their bosses, it's easier to sell products to consumers if the consumers say, well, do I want to buy this thing that's just another object or something that's also good for the environment? And then at the end of the day, so many entrepreneurs told me that when the times got tough, I said, why didn't you quit? Why didn't you give up? I would have given up. That sounds impossibly hard. And they said, the fact that I knew if I succeeded, that I would have this additional impact, I would be helping the environment. I knew if I succeeded, I'd be helping people who need better healthcare. I knew I'd be helping women who need access to fertility services to freeze their eggs. So I think having that extra purpose can push you through and give you that last bit of energy you need in the toughest of times when otherwise you would think about quitting.
And women are more likely to start purpose-driven companies?
Women are more likely to start purpose-driven companies. And there are a lot of reasons for that. One of which is that women simply say they care about the environment and about social issues more than men do. Women donate to philanthropy more than men do. There are a lot of reasons for that. But I also do think that there's a little bit of anxiety around women feeling like they don't want to say, I just want to be greedy. I just want to make money. Whereas I think socially that's more acceptable for men to say, I'm just going to make a lot of money with my company. And women say doesn't feel socially valued as much for women, because there is this expectation that women are going to be even more philanthropic or more nurturing than they actually are. And there's also some interesting data about, because of that expectation of warmth and nurturing, that investors in general would preference male founders over female founders, even if they're pitching the same companies. But if you add a purpose-driven element, then it adds this element of warmth, and that really neutralizes the way investors see men and women. So men are equally likely to invest in men and women if a company has a purpose-driven component. So it might be easier for women to raise money if they have a purpose-driven component.
I hate that. I don't use the word hate, but it's the same in politics, right? Like we loved Hillary Clinton when she was in New York, and as soon as she decided she wanted to be president, we didn't like her anymore.
I think there's this whole like sense of people feeling uncomfortable if women are too explicit about wanting money and power. I think it makes people uncomfortable.
That is so wild. Still, do you think that's changing? I find that Gen Z men, when I speak to them, are way more comfortable with women in power, women who want, like, I think that they're more comfortable with feelings. I see a shift in
But
the
I think it's
generation
also
below me.
women. I mean, I think women feel more comfortable saying, I'm going to make a ton of money with my company and I'm going to save the world. I think it's easier for them to own it. And I don't think it's right, but I think it helps them. I think the fact that 2% of venture capital dollars go to female founders is crazy. I mean, I think the numbers are really bad. But to me, having examples out there is really important. You mentioned Hillary Clinton, right? Like in politics, you need to have a lot of examples of female leaders in politics for more women to be like, oh, I could run for president. I could run for office. And then I think in business, you need a lot of examples of women who have succeeded and not burnt out and not given up to know that like, oh, I can do this and I can succeed. You just need to have more examples. So in my book, I wanted to have a mix of stories of people you've never heard of before, like Jennifer Holmgren, and women who you've heard of, but maybe you don't know the whole story. So I wanted it to be a mix of both because I think that to change people's minds of what people should feel comfortable doing, what they should aspire to, you need both men and women to understand that this is what leaders look like. Leaders look like women. Leaders come in all shapes and sizes. They are diverse. They have different backgrounds. This is what business leadership looks like. And until you have a really broad assortment of examples out there, of the diversity of examples out there, then I think it's hard for men to be like, oh, I want to go work for her. Or, oh, I want to invest in her if they haven't seen more examples. And women need to be like, I could be her. It's just not Elizabeth Holmes is the only example. I could be a successful female leader. And I think we need to change the like narratives in the culture.
What did you think about the president of New Zealand stepping down? Because I think
she should be allowed to step down. She did a great job for 6 years. 6 years is a long time.
But a lot of it illustrated things in your book. Like I felt confused about it because on one hand, you talk a lot about ego and humility in the book. And
namely that women tend to have humility.
Right. And I was thinking like men in our country never want to give up power to literally the country's like deficit. And
I think, it's a really interesting question. When I saw that news, I thought it's a bummer that we don't have another amazing female leader out there we can use as an example, but like good for her. She did a good job. Right. She worked really hard for 6 years and she knows that if she keeps on staying in this role, she's not going to be able to give it her all. So to me, it's like you'd much rather have a leader that knows their limitations. And I think this is true in general. Like you don't want a leader to pretend they've got all this stuff figured out when they actually need to hire other people to help them, right?
Yeah.
You want a leader who knows like, I've done my part. This has been a great 6 years. And why do I want to have my last 2 years be terrible? Like, I don't want to end on that note. Like, it's about honesty in a lot of ways and authenticity. So I thought good for her. And I wish everyone would be more honest and authentic about when they knew they could give it their all. And by the way, when it's like, I'm sick, I need to stay home. I'm not going to do a good job if I come to work today. Yeah. And I think there's this pressure to constantly be like pushing, but you're only going to be successful in the pushing or the, whether it's, politically or in any business situation, if you're honest about what your limits are. And so I think it's been interesting with this whole conversation about work from home and hybrid work and vacation. Like there's a certain amount of rest that makes you more productive. And so being honest about that, I think is really valuable if you want to be successful.
Glennon Doyle always says that sleep is the secret of superheroes. And I love that line. I agree. You mentioned the 2% of venture capital funding that goes to female-led companies. In the book, you talk about how it's particularly difficult for women in tech, which I found interesting because I felt like it was difficult for women everywhere. So to hear that it's worse in tech is sort of alarming. Aside from starting companies that have a good for you arm, did you find that there were any advantages that women had when pitching, or any edges that they had that you can share? Because a lot of the pretty smart listeners are women who have big dreams and start companies and do cool stuff.
Well, I would say that women have lots of disadvantages, but understanding what they are can set them up to be more successful. And my book very much is positive and optimistic. And I truly believe that people can create their own roadmap and their path to success. But I do also think part of that is understanding the terrible stuff and understanding the double standards you're going to face. There's some interesting research about when women are pitching, the disadvantages they face. One of which is that VCs, investors, are more likely to ask women about the downside risk. What's the worst case scenario? What's the worst thing that's going to happen if the economy craters? What are you going to do? This sounds, like give us your solution. Men going into those same investors are more likely to be asked about the upside. Give us your best possible outcomes. Tell us what your biggest dreams are. Like, how big could this company be? So women oftentimes didn't know that because they're in the room by themselves with the investors. So when this research came out, really opened a lot of people's eyes. And there were a number of women I talked to about this research. A couple of CEOs, they told me, oh, it really changed my approach. Once I saw that data, I went into the room. I was ready to give them the answer about the downside risk, but then I knew I could immediately pivot and say, and hey, by the way, let me tell you about my best case scenario. So they knew the situation. They knew it wasn't an even playing field, but they could sort of even it out themselves. And that was really effective for them. Another example is that women are more likely to talk about their companies as they are now. Nuts and bolts, here are our numbers, here's what we're dealing with, here are the struggles, opportunities right now. Men are more likely to not lie, but give their expectations for the company in a year. Here's what we're doing, talking more in the present tense about things as they imagine them being in a year. And so it's just a different way of talking about your business. And there was one CEO, Shanlin Ma, the CEO of a company called Zola that does wedding registry stuff. It's an amazing company. She was having a really hard time pitching her company. First of all, the investors, who are mostly men, said to her, like, how big is the wedding industry anyways? Like, it can't be that big. And of course, every woman is like, excuse me. And by the way, it is a $50 billion industry.
Yeah.
So she was having a hard time getting these male investors to understand the market and the problem that she was solving. But she also, and she describes herself as sort of borderline introvert, was not pounding the table and talking about how amazing her company could be. And after one of the pitch meetings, she pulled aside the one female investor she had seen in her dozens of meetings. And she said, can you just tell me what I'm doing wrong? Not getting any traction. This is so hard. Why is my message not resonating? And this woman said to her, look, I know you're being honest about your business, but you just need to understand that the men are coming in here. They are pounding the table. They're talking about how they're going to go to the moon and they're going to change the world and things are going to be amazing. And I understand that you're being honest. And we all understand that they're inflating a little bit. They're blustering. And we're not saying that you should bluster, but you should just know that this is what people are doing. So go out there, give them your best case scenario, be honest, but don't hold back. And it was a game changer for her to get that message of it is a kind of different world. It's not an even playing field. And I think that was really helpful for her. And that's why I think that women do face a lot of disadvantages when they go into pitch, but they also have the opportunity to flip things to their advantage once they know the situation.
I have a pitch coming up and I needed to hear that because I need to go pound the table in my own way. So that's great.
In your own way. You're never going to do it in the same way a guy would, but do it in your own way.
So you talk about gratitude in helping leaders with long-term decision-making. And I was shocked to hear this. I think gratitude is so buzzy. Can you break it down for us?
Yes, it's so funny because, I have kids, I have a husband, I have an amazing family. And I always think about celebrating gratitude when I'm with my family and being grateful when we're all together. And it never, in 20 years in the business news space, I never once thought about gratitude as being a business skill. Not at all. Did not occur to me. But I was interviewing all these amazing women, and one after another, there was this one week, and it was during the pandemic, I was doing all these interviews on Zoom. One after another kept on talking about things I'm grateful for. Whitney Wolfe said she was so grateful. She had this traumatic experience at Tinder because it enabled her to start Bumble, which was positive and aiming to help women. I was like, you're grateful for that? woman after woman was saying, like, I'm grateful that my family is unbanked because then I had proximity to this problem. And I, as a startup founder, had access to the tools to solve it. So Sheena Allen, the CEO of a company called Capway. So women who are grateful for their experience, even bad ones, for their opportunity to solve problems, and for having gotten as far as they had, grateful for mentorship, for relationships, for their network. And it was so like clear to me with all of these comments all in a row that I was like, there's something here. So then I dug into the research to understand it. And I found a couple of interesting things. The first is that women are more likely to practice gratitude and to enjoy the feeling of gratitude than men are. And this is socialized. This is not biological. And the researchers think that's because sometimes if men feel too grateful, they feel like, oh, maybe I owe someone something and I don't want to owe anyone anything. Whereas women are socialized to enjoy and celebrate the feeling of gratitude. So that's interesting. And then also there's all this research showing that practicing gratitude, which means just thinking about something you're grateful about, enables you to have patience. And in business, that translates to longer term decision-making and planning. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, if you think about it, it makes sense. If you feel grateful for where you are, you feel sort of stable in your situation, you don't feel anxious to have a near-term win. You're not going to do anything rash to have a near-term win. You're like, we're okay. Feel grateful for where we are. I can take a beat and think about what we should be doing for the long term. So it drives this sort of this abundance thinking, like we're okay. I can make smart decisions with the most information I need. I'm not going to rush to a solution, as opposed to a scarcity mentality of like, I need to rush and win as much as I can right in this instant. And it's so interesting. And like, there's this crazy study about people opting to make more money later if they practice gratitude rather than taking a smaller check up front. And it really makes sense to me the more people I interview, where you see that having that gratitude, not being in a panic for a win, can just make you smarter about making longer term decisions and investing for the long term.
That's really cool. I was in Japan right before the pandemic, and I learned how they think about companies, like when they start companies in 100-year span. And we think about companies in like 2 to 5 and then maybe 10-year spans. And the idea of building something that lasts, I think, requires gratitude. So it makes total sense to me. It's very cool.
I think it's really cool. And I actually, of all of the things in the book, that's the one I try to remind myself about every day. Like practice gratitude. You have so much to be grateful for, and use that gratitude to make smart, longer term decisions.
So did you interview 120 people for the book?
Yes.
So 120 people, mostly women.
Yes.
Did you find any sort of through line? I know it's hard with 120 people. I saw Trevor Noah ask Oprah this question about like Oprah's interviewed the most successful people. What do they all have in common? Is there something you found?
What did Oprah say?
She had a great answer. She said they all had direction. They knew where they wanted to go, because you get to where you want to go, but you have to have that in mind.
Yeah.
Was there a through line for you with the women?
Well, I would say they all had a growth mindset, which I understand a growth mindset as being the balance of humility to understand you don't know everything, and confidence to know that you can learn. And you can learn it. So to me, that a balance of humility and confidence. So they all had a growth mindset. And the other thing that was really key is that so many of these people did not fit the stereotype of all of them didn't fit the stereotype of what a leader looked like, because they weren't men, they weren't white men. And the stereotype of a leader is a white man. So in not fitting that stereotype, they felt liberated to do things in their own way, both to lead in their own way and also to create companies that solved products or, created products or services that were different. And I think that liberation from the dominant stereotype and authentic leadership was something that was really consistent. The women who I write about who were successful, they were successful because they were leading and doing things that were really authentic to them and who they were. And they weren't trying to be someone else. They weren't trying to copy someone else's business idea or strategy or management approach. They were just like, who am I and how can I make this work for me?
Okay, a few rapid fires before you leave me. So you've interviewed a lot of powerful and strategic people. What have you learned about asking people questions that they don't want to answer?
Ask it with a smile. And I think they need to understand, and I increasingly try to help people to understand that if they answer the hard questions, it's going to benefit them because everyone's thinking about those same questions anyways. It's seldom that I ask a really hard question that isn't something that everybody is wondering.
Yeah. There's no like gotcha. It's like truly the underlying.
But like everyone knows the gotchas are coming, right?
Yeah.
Like we all know like the mistake would be not asking the hard question because it would be weird not to ask it. It's always the elephant in the room.
That's such a good reframe.
But I think sometimes even asking it with compassion, you know, like this is a hard question and I'm going to ask it to you, but I'm here to listen to your answer and I'm giving you an opportunity to answer it.
That's really great. Thank you for that. What did you want to be when you were growing up?
When I was really little, I wanted to be a ballet dancer. When I was the age of I have an 8-year-old, and when I was his age, I wanted to be a ballet dancer. And then I wanted to be some sort of like international rights attorney saving the world. And it never happened. Well, you're kind of like international policy to help people.
It's cool. You're doing it in your own way.
In a different way, different kind of thing.
Okay. A piece of financial advice you think more women should know.
Don't be afraid of understanding finance. It's not rocket science. Take control of your finances, educate yourself. Don't be afraid. So many women I know just hand all the numbers, all the money over to their partners and don't engage with it. If they have husbands or partners, there's a lot of research on this. Women need to be empowered, not just to save, but also to invest and to understand that they can understand it. It's really not that complicated. And more than anything, they should be figuring out the stuff that they're wary of approaching.
A piece of financial advice that women should ignore.
That the stock market is too risky for women to invest in.
A negotiating tip you've picked up along the years.
Oh, this is a tough one. I don't know if I've ever deployed this, but try to find out what your peers are making.
That's a really good one.
But at other companies, and now there are actually a lot of tech tools like Glassdoor and other companies like Comparably that can help you do that research. So go in armed with information about what's appropriate. Oh, by the way, there's this new law, pay transparency law, that's mandating that companies based in New York and California and other states have to disclose pay ranges for different roles. And I just think that that's a great thing and take advantage of it. You're not going to get all the information you want, but whenever you're negotiating for pay, do a little homework first to find out if you're getting, lowballed, for whatever the word is.
A book you read that changed your life, something you think everyone should read.
Well, there's so many of them. There's an amazing book called Fair Play that a friend of mine, Eve Rodsky, wrote, which is great if you have a partner and you're trying to divide up household chores and invisible labor. And it's really about this idea of like not taking on too much invisible labor. And honestly, Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg really influenced me because it just reminded me that I needed to ask for a seat at the table. And I know it's been criticized for being mostly for affluent white women and who have a lot of privilege. And I certainly have a lot of privilege, but I think it reminded me not to hold back in a way that I'd been holding back.
Her book really influenced me as well. Okay. I have a pretty smart question. So because we're virtual, just tell me when.
When?
What is the most unique or important skill you've learned from your job?
It's what you asked, how to ask really tough questions in a way that's not painful for both the viewer and for the person answering them.
And this is a tough one. So whatever comes to your mind, the smartest decision you've ever made.
Oh, that's a tough one.
I know.
There's like the personal ones, getting married and having kids. And I think, honestly, it's probably going on TV and trying it, even though it was tough professionally. And it was like just doing the thing, even though I didn't know what I was doing. Yeah. And the doors that opened by pushing myself outside my comfort zone.
Well, I didn't get to this part, but you said you don't get nervous and that's your superpower. So that's a pretty good superpower.
I'll take it. I get nervous sometimes, but I didn't get nervous on TV that first time.
It's so good. Thank you. I know you have to run. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you and answer your very smart questions.
Thank you.